This is Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast, episode number 21.
Embarrassing moment, culture insights, proven methods to achieve Chinese fluency. Skip that learning curve with the Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast. Now, your host, Victor Yang.
Hello everyone, Victor Yang here and welcome to Journey to Chinese Fluency. Today I am joined by Iain Inglis. Iain is from the city of Cardiff, which is the capital city of Wales in the United Kingdom. Iain has always enjoyed learning foreign languages. Apart from English and Chinese, he started to learn the ancient Celtic language of Welsh when he was in primary school. He has learned French for 7 or 8 years, and his university course was interpreting and translating Russian and German into English. He also has some conversational Japanese since he lived in Hokkaido, Japan for 2 years. And he speaks some basic Czech and Dutch. Let me repeat that. That's English, Chinese, the ancient Celtic language, French, Russian, German, Japanese, Czech, and Dutch. That's 9 languages. Iain has been living in China for 13 years. He is now 39 years old, living in the beautiful tropical city of Sanya in the province of Hainan. Iain is a freelance actor, presenter, and singer. If that's not interesting enough introduction, here's another interesting fact about Iain. Iain enjoys singing Chinese rap songs, which are the patriotic songs that praise China and the Chinese Communist Party. It has helped him massively with his Chinese learning. Iain appeared on China's Got Talent and became very famous for singing the Chinese rap song. 你好, Iain.
你好, Victor. How are you?
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Victor. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Are you ready to share with us your journey to Chinese fluency?
Absolutely. I cannot wait.
Awesome. Let's do this. So, first of all, feel free to fill in the blank a bit for the introduction.
Right. So you're completely right. My passion is language learning. I've been learning languages since about the age of 6 when I learned French. I lived in Ottawa, Canada for a few years and I learned French there. Then when I went back to the UK and Wales at the age of 8, I began learning Welsh. And then following on from that, pretty much as you described, then there was French later on, 7, 8 years in comprehensive school. That's secondary school, I should say. And on to university, and I found out that languages was basically the only thing that I was good at.
Wow.
And therefore enjoyed. Yeah. So then fast forwarding a bit to my postgraduate qualification of interpreting and translating, I left university and I looked for a job in the UK for a number of years, but for some reason I could not find a job. So I began sending my resume, my CV, to many different companies and institutions. And luckily, I found a job in Hokkaido, Japan, teaching English.
Wow.
I know, crazy. And it was there that I met my wife, who is Chinese. She was studying in Japan and I was working in Japan. And then that is the reason then why I ended up in China, where I've been for the past 13 plus years.
Wow. Have you always been in Hainan?
No. Good question. My first stop in China, if you like, was Suzhou, which is about, 1 hour from... No. In those days, it was 1 hour from Shanghai. But now with the high-speed rail, it's maybe 15 or 20 minutes from Shanghai.
Sure.
It's a lovely little city. They call it the Venice of the East, a water city, lots of canals, beautiful. I was there for 1 year. And my wife was in Shanghai at East China Normal University. And then after 1 year, I moved to Shanghai and I was there for 1.5 years. So in total, 2.5 years elsewhere. And then I came to Hainan almost 11 years ago, 10.5 years ago.
Right. So what made you move to China?
Well, as I mentioned, and as you delineated so well in your splendid introduction, I have been interested in languages. And even before I had met my wife, I was interested in China and the Chinese language. Of course, it's spoken by so many people around the world. The linguistic and cultural influence of China stretches, of course, far beyond its borders. There are Chinese communities basically everywhere in the world. So I was very interested. And of course, it's a United Nations working language. So I was very interested by Chinese, but of course, didn't think I could learn it realistically in my own country. So I was interested in China, but I think the main deciding factor of whether I come to China or not was the fact that I met my wife at a point in my life that was, I shouldn't say I met her at a convenient time. That doesn't sound like true love, but but it was something like that. Yeah. So my wife was a big reason.
Right. Cool. So is your wife also your biggest motivation in learning Chinese?
Well, that's a very good question. Many Chinese friends often say to me, "Oh, you speak quite good Chinese." And I say, yes. And then when we talk, or after we talk for a while, they say, I see, you have a Chinese wife. No wonder you speak good Chinese. But then I explain to them, and in fact, it's not, in my case at least, it's not that simple, because my wife and I do not have a teacher and student relationship. So she does not teach me Chinese. I need a teacher to teach me Chinese. So in fact, when I met my wife, we began speaking English because I could not speak Chinese in those days. And since then, we very often speak English. So I should say I'm not motivated by her to learn Chinese, but more I'm motivated by my life in China. I need to survive. I need to talk to people. I need to communicate. That is my biggest motivation to learn Chinese.
Right. So when you moved to China, did you already make the decision that you want to live in China for the long term?
Yes and no. I had not made any decisions, nothing specific, but I think I had considered it, yes, because, China is developing very quickly, it's improving all the time, and I can see that the future is bright, basically, to sound a bit cliched, I know, but it's true, when you come to China and you see the changes being made. Even then, in 2004, when I came to China, I considered it, yes, but I wouldn't say I had decided. It just kind of happened, I think, right. And I didn't fight against it, and I certainly do not regret it.
So what have been your method of learning Chinese? What's been the most effective technique or method that's been working for you?
Well, Victor, I was afraid that you would ask me this question.
Why?
Because many Chinese friends also ask me this question. For example, I know a lot of Chinese friends who are trying to learn English, and they ask me, they say, hey, you speak some Chinese. How did you learn it? And I never know what to say to them, other than you have to go and immerse yourself in the language. For example, when I learned Russian many years ago, I studied Russian, I studied the grammar, I studied the phrases, I could pass the exam, but I couldn't speak it. As soon as I went to Russia and no one around me understood any English, my Russian improved massively in 6 months. And it's the same thing. I mean, you just have to go. So I would say to all our friends who are listening and who want to learn Chinese, you have to come to China. I mean, you must. Otherwise, I don't think it's realistically going to work. That's just my opinion.
Sure. Well, you have been very successful in learning a lot of languages. So I'm sure you must be doing something right.
Yes.
When you were learning the other, I wouldn't say 8 languages, English is a native language, the other 7 languages. So what exactly did you do?
Yeah, I mean, of course, with the other languages that I learned, they were a bit different to my learning of Chinese, because I would start with a textbook with those, let's say my German, I would have lessons in German from a German teacher, also from a native speaker, and using textbook and grammar exercises. And only later did I try to improve my oral German. With my Chinese, though, I did use a textbook in the beginning, of course, because I needed to know the very basics. I needed to know the pinyin. I needed to know some basic Chinese characters. But after I had this sort of 基础, this basis or this fundament in Chinese, then I could build on that very easily in my daily life. So what you will know as a Chinese person talking to me is that in fact my knowledge of Chinese is not that great. I do not have a very wide vocabulary in Chinese, but I just speak everyday Chinese quite well because I've never systematically learned Chinese as I did other languages. So for me, I just had a dictionary. Of course, now I can have a dictionary on my telephone these days, and maybe a textbook at the beginning to learn the pinyin and the phrases. And it wasn't so difficult because, of course, compared to European languages, Chinese doesn't have much grammar to speak of. It's not the same, you know, how in a European language things change, the verb has tenses, etc. It's easier, I think, in that way.
That's true. Yeah, you mentioned a very good point. So passing the beginner's level in Chinese and then you immerse yourself into the environment, that will make the learning process much easier. So let's just focus on the beginning.
Yes.
Because when you just landed in China, do you speak any Chinese at all?
Well, when I was in the UK, I had about 6 to 8, just a handful of Chinese lessons with a lady from Beijing, with other students in a class, and I had bought a textbook. I had also already been to China the year before, just on a holiday, and it was there on the flight from China back to Japan that I met my wife. So I spoke a little. For example, I could ask directions. I could ask, how much does this cost? Maybe I could say where I was from, something like that.
Right. So you had some very basic sentences to be able to communicate.
Yes.
Apart from that, you know nothing. So once you landed in China, did you take any class, or how did you get yourself up to a more of a conversational level where you can just be more passive in learning Chinese and let the Chinese to teach you stuff?
Right. Well, when I went to Suzhou, I was lucky that some of my colleagues spoke good English. One of my colleagues who spoke good English also sometimes taught me Chinese, but not regularly. Maybe on an ad hoc basis. When he had time, he would teach me some things. I also had 1 or 2 local friends who were very patient, and they would listen to my bad Chinese and would also correct my Chinese. So I did make a few friends at the beginning. And I think it was a combination of having a few friends who spoke maybe a little English, but were also very patient to listen to my Chinese, a few colleagues who spoke good English, and also a textbook or 2 and a dictionary. I think it was just that, along with the main environment, like the 大环境, the sort of environment in China, the linguistic environment, all of these things together just pushed me to learn Chinese. Of course, and you also have things like the television, you have the radio, you have advertisements everywhere, things like this. Sometimes, without your noticing, you will learn things from this kind of propaganda, if you like.
Yeah, sure. Right, that makes sense. Well, so while you were at home or, in your spare time, instead of, looking at some, English entertainment and stuff, instead in watching all the Chinese stuff, isn't it?
Well, do you know, we don't have a television at home.
Oh, that's true.
No, in fact, we got rid of our television 3 or 4 years ago.
Wow.
Well, occasionally I'll watch a few programs from CCTV, from China Central Television.
Yes.
Some news programs sometimes. Do you know a program called 今日说法?
Yes. Very, very famous one.
Yes, I don't know the English name of that program, but
it's like, I guess it's talking about the news and the law involved in it.
Exactly.
It's like a current affair.
Exactly. It's like a current affairs program. For example, there will be an incident, something has happened, and the experts will discuss the legal ramifications and et cetera, like this. It's a very interesting program. Sometimes I watch that.
Sure.
But mostly, and I'm a bit embarrassed to say this to you, when I'm at home, I tend to watch British television programs just for a bit of nostalgia, because I don't go home very often.
Yeah, sure.
So I take the opportunity to watch British shows.
Sure. Well, I guess interaction with native Chinese is the most important thing that happened to you, which helped you a lot with learning Chinese.
Yes, you're right.
In my introduction, which is the information I gathered from you, that you learned Chinese from the Chinese rap songs. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, when I was learning some other languages years ago, I found that by learning songs, you can improve your vocabulary a lot. I mean, I was lucky because I like singing. I'm not a good singer. I have to stress that point. I'm not a good singer, but I enjoy it anyway. Maybe you don't like to listen, but that's fine. So I like music, I like singing. So I found that through learning songs, you can improve and broaden your vocabulary, because there'll be lots of words in the songs that you may not use on a day-to-day basis. Maybe they are slightly more poetic or less common words or phrases. So you can learn them from the songs. And, as I'm going through the lyrics, I see this word and I think, what does that mean? And you go to look in the dictionary and you write it down and I remember it. And then the song makes sense to you and you can remember it then, and you'll know that word forevermore. So, yes, I found learning Chinese songs, especially the older sort of revolutionary songs, which sung with a bit of gusto, they're great. Then my vocabulary improved. But it improved quite a lot.
Nice. Is there any particular reasons you chose those type of songs, like instead of any other popular songs?
Well, I think my strange fascination for red songs began when I was younger because, well, I think I'm probably older than you. And I grew up in a time, or just at the end of the Cold War, when we were told that people in Eastern Europe and the USSR and China were bad people, or they're our enemies and things like this. So I was interested in the sort of the life,
right,
the languages, the culture of these countries. And I learned also some red songs from the former USSR and the German Democratic Republic and the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic and these countries. And it seemed natural for me just to learn some Chinese red songs, because I'm quite interested in that period of history as well. So it not only broadened my language, I suppose improved my language skills, I should say, in Chinese, but it also allowed me to learn a bit about the recent history of China and, sort of so-called red culture and how the country came into being. Yeah.
Yes, definitely very interesting style of songs, and the lyrics are also interesting. I remember when I was young, I used to hear those type of rap songs a lot, and I can sing some of that as well. So it's definitely, it's definitely worth checking out, to our listeners. If you have never heard the Chinese rap songs, give it a go. You may love it. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, they represent a whole period in Chinese history. Very important, just to learn about your host country and your host culture.
Yes. Cool. So during your learning of Chinese, what's been your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it?
Well, my biggest challenge, I think, are two challenges for me in Chinese. And to be honest, I have not overcome them yet. So unfortunately, it's not such a positive message. But my main challenge, or my first challenge that I found, was my listening skills, I should say. My listening skills in Chinese are, I think, the weakest, because the Chinese language has many characters, many words that sound either the same or very similar to the English speaker. Maybe the tone is different. Maybe there is a hobiyin, so maybe they have a G at the end, or maybe they don't. Things like this, but the very subtle differences. To me, and this is still a problem, many Chinese words sound similar to one another. And then if you add to that the many different accents and dialects that you find in China, if someone speaks to you in an accent to which you are not accustomed, which you may not have heard before, I find myself understanding maybe almost nothing. And I've been here for 13 years, but someone asks me a simple question and suddenly I understand nothing. And I think, what? How is this? What? I can't understand this, But it's because of a peculiarity of the Chinese language whereby each character is monosyllabic and the total number of sounds in the language is very small. And if it's distorted by an accent, then there's almost no way of understanding what the person's saying. That's a big challenge for me. And my listening skills are definitely the weakest.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I guess the way you overcome that is by listening more of those, like if you hear an accent, it's just a matter of hearing more of that accent. Eventually you get used to it.
Exactly. I mean, this is the only thing I can do, but I think this is really an ongoing challenge. This cannot be overcome, overnight in a day or two. This is going to carry on and on because China's so big and there are so many accents and so many dialects. It's almost endless.
That's right.
And the second thing is probably, and I even have Chinese friends who have commented on this, that I quite quickly reached a level of fluency in Chinese that was quite high, so I could speak fluently about everyday things, chatting about this, chatting about that. But it's very difficult to go past that level. So really to, get into the language. And for example, in Chinese, they have 成语. And I don't know what you'd call them in English, maybe certain phrases, proverbs.
Yeah. Idioms,
and proverbs, this sort of thing. There are lots and lots in Chinese, as there are in other languages. But because a lot of the words sound similar in Chinese, they're quite difficult to remember. It's difficult to study them because they also have very subtle meanings, some of them. And if you really want to know the Chinese language inside out, then I think you have to learn these idioms and proverbs. But I think I'm a bit too lazy, and I have not overcome that challenge yet either. So,
well, you're not the only one. Yeah, I mean, you're not the only one struggling with that. Previously I interviewed Da Shan, who is Mark Roswell, and he mentioned his biggest challenge is those set phrases. So, which is, it's not even 成语, it's just the phrase that's kind of random. So you're not alone, basically.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, even native Chinese are still learning those. It's endless.
Yes, I know. I mean, it's the same in English. I could not possibly know all the proverbs. But, some common ones. Maybe it's good to know 20, 30 common ones, because sometimes people will say one to me in the sentence and I understand everything except for that phrase, and it's quite embarrassing.
Yeah, well, I understand. I guess that shows how good a person's Chinese is, when they speak.
Exactly.
When native Chinese speaking, the more that type of phrases they use, it actually shows their vocabulary. Some people don't use that many, but some people prefer to use a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm talking to my wife and I started using a lot of that, and I feel good about it. I just feel, my Chinese is pretty good. Even I am a native Chinese, I still feel good for being able to know a lot of these type of phrases. So, that gives you an idea how hard it is.
Yeah.
你
很有文化.
Yeah.
It's like your level of sophistication and culture is very high. Yeah.
That's right. Well, if you are to start learning Chinese from scratch all over again, how would you do it?
I think I would do it a little bit differently. I think I would do it more systematically. As I mentioned before, I had a few lessons at the beginning, but then after that, I did not have many lessons whereby I had a teacher teaching me and testing me. And for example, you'd have a 主题, this lesson, you'd have a theme or a topic, this lesson, and it will be adjectives, or it will be nouns, or it will be proper nouns or something. It could be any grammatical topic. I would do it much more systematically next time if I could.
Right. Why is that?
Well, because at the moment my Chinese is really 乱七八糟.
It's a mess.
Yeah, it's chaotic.
Yeah.
For example, I know some words which are very specialized, and sometimes Chinese people are very impressed when I say this word, but at the same time, there are lots of basic words that I've never learned and I don't know how to say them. So it's a mess, it's a kind of a jumbled mess, my Chinese. That's a pity.
You know what? I actually have a similar feeling in speaking English.
Really?
Yeah, I've been living in Melbourne, Australia for 16 years now.
Wow.
And I can do, basic conversations, no problem. Like, now I'm talking to you in English.
Yes.
But sometimes, even now I have 2 baby boys and
Yes.
I started reading some baby books.
Yes.
And there's so many vocabulary that I don't even understand. Like in the nursery rhymes, I always see those different rhymes, like
Yes.
those English words I've never seen before, I've never heard before. I just feel kind of embarrassed. This is baby stuff. How come I don't even know that? And I can speak, very technical terminologies, but, sometimes I don't even know those basic stuff. So I'm with you, on that.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose it depends on the sort of lingu, like the field of vocabulary. Like, is it, if you've done a special class on nursery rhyme vocabulary, then you'd be great at it. But, nobody gives you this kind of class, right? So you're never going to learn it. And in nursery rhymes, much of the English is very old-fashioned anyway.
Right.
It comes from, I don't know, Europe several hundred years ago. So don't worry about that. Nobody uses that anymore. Don't worry.
That's good to hear. Awesome. So now, please share with us an embarrassing or a funny moment while you were learning Chinese.
Okay. I remember one time I wanted to say to my wife something like, don't forget your bag. Of course, a bag is a bao, but a leather bag, I think, is a pi bao, right?
Yes.
But I put pi and bao the wrong way round. I put bao pi, which I believe means foreskin.
Yes.
So I said, darling, don't forget your foreskin. Kind of I had to be there, I admit, but it was a little bit embarrassing because some of her friends were there as well.
Yeah. That's a funny one. So now, please share with us a success story, a most rewarding moment after you have become fluent in Chinese.
Well, I think I would have to say that probably the most rewarding would be, well, one of several, I suppose. I've been invited onto quite a lot now of Chinese television shows to talk about my experiences in China and to talk about my singing of Chinese traditional songs. And I think for me, that would be quite a success story. The fact that people can phone me up in Chinese, invite me to fly to Beijing, to appear on China Central Television and to talk about my life in China in Chinese. To Chinese people. I mean, I think for me, that's quite a big success. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. How would you compare your life before you've learned Chinese and your life after you have learned Chinese?
Well, obviously, my life in China, after having learned Chinese, has improved massively because at the beginning, I just had to rely on, well, my wife, but also other friends to interpret and translate for me, to buy, even small things like buying tickets for the train or the bus, things like this. I couldn't do it, it was difficult to do. And, my life has improved so much by learning Chinese. I can do things myself. I can get everything done.
Sure.
Or also, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with my Chinese, to be honest, but I now have permanent residency in China, so like a Chinese green card, which is quite difficult to obtain. So I'm also quite lucky in having that. And that's another impetus for me to stay here because that shows that I've really, I don't know how to say that in English, that I'm sort of become part of this society now. So
yes,
my life has improved greatly.
Definitely. So now please share with us one special thing about the Chinese culture that is different to your own culture.
Well, the main thing that strikes me is 酒文化.
酒文化.
The drinking culture in China, as opposed to, say, the United Kingdom, but also maybe similar in Australia and other English-speaking countries, I expect. So in China, it is the job of the host of the party or the host of the dinner at the evening to make sure that all of his or her guests go home drunk.
Yes.
I mean, and the host will think of different ways in which to make you drink. If you don't want to drink much, he will think of some ways in which to do that. Of course, this drinking culture differs a little bit in different places in China, but generally speaking, I think that is a characteristic of it. Whereas in, say, the UK, I know if you want to drink, you can drink, but if you don't want to drink, that's fine. There will often be one designated driver who will not drink all night, etc. And people will respect your decision. But I remember once, quite vividly, a few years ago, I was drinking with a friend of a friend in Jiangxi province. And the man who was sort of like the host of the evening, he was drinking a very strong Chinese liquor called baijiu. And it is quite strong. It was maybe 40 or around 50% alcohol. And although we were drinking very small glasses, like a thimble-sized glass, it was very strong. And he kept pouring them. You know, after you drank one, you drink another and another. Yeah. Anyway, so at the end of the evening, I was completely legless. And he had a driver send me home. And when I got to my home, I stepped out of the car and just promptly collapsed onto the pavement. And I was crawling. I mean, I couldn't even stand up. It was very embarrassing, quite it was really an embarrassing situation. But anyway, the next day, I phoned my friend, this gentleman I was drinking with, and I apologized to him. I said, sorry for my behavior last night. I had too much to drink. Please forgive me. I should not have done that. And he said, what are you talking about? I was the host. I made you drunk. I should apologize to you, he said. And that was for me, that was a real difference in the culture because, you know, in Western countries, generally, you have to be responsible for your own behavior. If you do not want to drink, then you say, no, I will not drink. Yeah. If you do drink, you have to behave well. You cannot be crazy because if you are, it's your own fault and nobody else's fault. But in China, because his job as the host of the party was to make sure we were drunk or that we'd had, quote unquote, enough to drink, then he said he should apologize to me because he made me drink too much. I thought, oh, brilliant. So, you know, I'll give the responsibility back to you then. Perfect.
That's true. That's true. They make sure you drink a lot.
Yeah.
In some situations, they make sure you drink a lot. Yeah.
Which is why I've given up alcohol now, actually, Victor.
I think that's a good idea, to be honest. I think that's a really good idea. Basically, if you just have a good, big meal with Chinese, you know, and as long as you start drinking, someone must get drunk.
I know, which is why I found it easier now just to say, I don't drink anymore. I never drink. And for over a year now, I've had nothing to drink and people accept that now. Yeah.
Yes. People will accept either you drink nothing at all or you have to get drunk. So
exactly.
That's the only two choices you have.
Exactly. You're totally right. You cannot say, oh, I'll just have one glass. No.
Exactly.
That's taboo.
And then when they give you the second glass, if you say no, they will say, oh, you're not giving me enough face.
Yeah.
Right? In China, they'll say, you got to give me the face. So you have to drink it to respect me. You know,
exactly.
It's kind of like you have to show respect to drink.
Exactly. It's like, you're humiliating me. It's like you're offending me. You have to drink more. Oh, so what can you say to that?
That's right.
You can only get drunk. It's difficult.
That's right. Do you have a favorite city in China?
Well, I know it sounds a bit silly, but actually the city I live in is one of my favorites. Probably the favorite, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I moved here, because it has warm weather all year round. It's tropical. It's a tropical climate. Yes. And it's not too big, but it's not too small either. So it's much more convenient than, say, Beijing or Shanghai. If you want to go out somewhere, you can cross the city in 30 or 40 minutes. Whereas, as you know, in Beijing, Shanghai, if you go to your friend's house, maybe it takes 1 hour or 1.5 hours. Same if you go to work.
Yes.
But it's also convenient in terms of transport. So Hong Kong is just over 1 hour away, and Macau, and there are direct flights to Thailand and Singapore and things like this. So it's well connected as well. It's a lovely little city.
Yeah, good environment, good weather as well. Not much pollution, isn't it?
Almost none. I mean, it's wonderful. It's great weather. The natural environment's lovely. No pollution. It's nothing like the north of China, which unfortunately is quite polluted in places.
Yes.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yes. Come to Sanya, everybody.
Yeah. Is there a tool, an app, or a website that you cannot live without in learning Chinese?
That's a difficult one. Do you know, I use two Chinese ones that I can think of. One of them is a dictionary type app called, I think it's called Aizaba or something. I forget the Chinese characters.
Aizaba.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's, Aizaba.
Aizaba, yeah. I mean, that's really good. It's very thorough. It occasionally has a few English strange abnormalities in it, but generally speaking, it's really good. It has lots of very wide vocabulary and lots of phrases too, not only individual words. So I'd recommend that one. Aizaba good. And there's another one I sometimes use just for fun, really. It's a little app that changes simplified Chinese into traditional, and traditional Chinese characters into simplified characters. And I like using that because, it just, even though we don't use traditional characters anymore on the mainland, but it does give you an idea and little insight into, how they used to be written. And of course, if you do go to Hong Kong, Macau, or Taiwan regularly, then they use them there. So,
right. What's the name of the app?
It just says here Chinese, just says 简，就简单的简体的简，然后有一个箭头，and then 旁边有繁体字的繁，简繁 or something, I don't know.
Right. So is that an app on your phone?
Yes, yeah. It's an iPhone app. Well, yeah, it's on my telephone here.
I see. Well, you can send that to me later and I'll put that in the show notes so our audience will be able to find it.
Super.
And by the way, 爱词霸 in Chinese is actually 金山词霸. So that's a Chinese name. Yeah.
金山词霸, I can see it here. Yeah, 我看到了. I can see it here now. 金山词霸.
That's right.
Thanks.
Yeah. I used to use 金山词霸 a lot. But nowadays I use 有道词典. It's very similar. It's also a dictionary app.
有道词典. Okay. Yeah, well, yeah. I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
Sure. So if you are to recommend to our listeners one book in learning Chinese or the Chinese culture, what would that be?
Well, as I've just mentioned, I like looking at traditional Chinese characters sometimes just to broaden your knowledge of Chinese and also to learn the origins of some of the characters that we read today. I quite like a book called 常用汉字.
常用汉字.
Yeah, it is a book that basically introduces to students the 1,020 character list, various different lists basically of the supposedly most used Chinese characters. So like the most common Chinese characters. What does it say? 1,062 basic characters and elements of the writing system. I'm just quoting from the book now. And so It lists all these characters and it lists them both the traditional and the simplified version. So you can compare and contrast them and you can learn the traditional as well if you want. It gives the pronunciation in pinyin. It gives the meaning in English. It gives an explanation of the character. So, for example, if it comprises of the water radical, for example, 三点水 or something like this, how the 三点水, the water radical, relates to the meaning, etc., etc. And it also gives a few phrases using that character. So it's an excellent, very thorough book, more of a reference book, but it's been really useful to me.
Cool. Sounds great. I'll link that in our show notes. So now this is your chance to teach our listeners your favorite Chinese quote, phrase, or expression.
Oh dear. Well, I've been living in China all this time, and as we've mentioned, sometimes you find there are cultural differences between my country, the UK, and China. And every time I come across a cultural difference, just for example, like the 酒文化, like the alcohol drinking culture, then Chinese friends will often look at me in the eye and say, 入乡随俗, which basically means when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Something like that in English is what we'd probably say.
That's a good translation.
Yeah, I mean, so basically you have to do what the locals are doing. And that's true. You do. You have to respect your local culture and what they do and try not to offend local people. So 入乡随俗 is a phrase that has been used many, many times by me and also sort of with me or to me from other people since I've been in China. Very useful.
Yeah, a good one. Yeah, it's very useful. Definitely often used. So 入乡随俗, 入 means to enter. 乡 means a village. 随 means to follow. And 俗 means the local culture. So
yes, customs.
When you enter the village, you got to follow, the local customs.
Yeah.
So, that's a good phrase. So if you are to give our listeners one single piece of parting advice in learning Chinese, what would that be?
Oh dear. Well, from a personal point of view, my listening is not good. So I think something I should do more, which I don't do, and that is listen to spoken Chinese more. So that would be a piece of advice to listeners. Listen to lots of Chinese news programs, dramas, films, because that's something I don't do enough. And I realize that my listening in Chinese is not as good as it could be and should be.
Maybe you should get a TV.
I have to buy a new one, yeah.
Awesome. So Iain, just before we let you go, how can our listeners reach you?
Okay, well, I have a Chinese Sina Weibo account. You know, Weibo or Weibo.
Yes.
I don't know how it's in English.
Yes.
Xinlang Weibo, yes. I'm on there, although I don't have many fans. You can find me on there. Or I'm also on LinkedIn. Lingying, but I think it is in Chinese, isn't it? LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn if you type my name in. Yeah, that's about it, really. I'd welcome any comments or questions from your listeners. That would be great.
Awesome. I'll definitely put that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Iain, for sharing with us your journey in learning Chinese. That's been an awesome journey. It's very interesting to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, Victor. It's been a pleasure being here.
To our listeners, the show note is now available at ChineseTalkEase.com/21. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. Do you want to learn Chinese for free? Start your own journey to Chinese fluency with my video lessons at ChineseTalkEase.com. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. Also remember to join our Facebook group. Just head over to talkchinesecommunity.com. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Each month, I will choose one reviewer and give out a 1-year subscription to all my premium video lessons for free. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next episode.